Hi there, it's me, Fla. Welcome back to today's video. Thank you for the feedback on the last video. I know I said we'll start with the AWS services that I presented in the last video, but based on the feedback, I'm adding a fundamentals video first. So before jumping into various AWS services in the upcoming content, we'll start with defining what AWS and the cloud actually is. So I'll walk you through some core topics so that the following videos will make more sense and we'll have a baseline to start off. I'm flexible with my topics and agenda, so keep on going with the great feedback. Alright, let's jump into today's presentation. Here you can see the different topics I want to cover as fundamentals, creating a baseline from which we can then jump into the offered AWS services and products. Let's start with what AWS is. AWS is a leading cloud provider offering on-demand IT services over the network. These resources include compute power, storage, databases, and more, allowing organizations of all types and sizes to scale their operations efficiently. Businesses leverage AWS for a broad range of use cases, including data backup, disaster recovery, virtual desktops, artificial intelligence, and so on and so on. Its scalability and comprehensive suite of services enables companies to adapt swiftly to changing demands, improve operational efficiency, and drive innovation across various sectors. Today, AWS offers over 200 services and products. In the last video, I went through a lot of them already, by their launch date, only showing the ones I've already used. Here, I've listed some categories, and there are a lot more, including 2 example services for each to give you an idea. Those services run on top of AWS infrastructure and hardware in AWS-owned data centers. On the AI-generated picture, you can see the inside of a data center as an example, with a lot racks that hold hardware modules. We'll discuss the global infrastructure later, but I want you to understand what the actual cloud is and looks like. Now let's talk about the origin of AWS. I personally like to understand why something was invented, as it helps me to really grasp the purpose and context. In order to talk about AWS particularly, we have to look at Amazon in general. Amazon was founded in 1994 by Jeff Bezos as an online bookstore. Over time, in the late 90s, Amazon started to expand its product offerings. In 1997, Amazon surpassed an annual net sales revenue of $100 million. Already in 1999, Amazon had an annual net sales revenue over $1 billion. So just in 5 years after founding it. So the applications and infrastructure were not built for the daily increasing user base and demands. It took months to add new components and infrastructure. Development was happening in silos without long-term thinking and creating reusable systems. The following points had been identified as major limitations, and as a consequence, a new methodology and change was brought to the internal IT. Services had to be separated in order to become reusable components. The services should have well-documented APIs so that anyone reading through the documentation is able to get started and consume the service without the need of someone explaining it. The service should be created with high availability and scalability in mind as a foundation. After making the points to habits, the results were that great that the question arose. The thoughts were, we did such a great job, we should make it available to the public, as this will bring huge value to others as well. So in 2006, Amazon started selling services as AWS. Now that we know what AWS is and why it was invented, let's have a look at what is behind AWS. The global Cloud infrastructure is a secure, extensive, and reliable platform. Whether you need to deploy your application across the globe or you want to build and deploy closer to your end users with single-digit millisecond latency, AWS provides you the cloud infrastructure where and when you need it. Right now, the AWS Cloud offers 33 geographic regions with 105 availability zones. 7 more regions and 21 more availability zones have already been announced. A region is a physical location around the world where data centers are clustered. Each region consists of at least 3 isolated and physically separated availability zones. An availability zone, in short called AZ, is one or more discrete data centers with redundant power, networking, and connectivity in a region. This allows customers to operate production applications that are more highly available, fault-tolerant, and scalable than it would be possible from a single or a few data centers that are self-maintained. All AZs in the region are interconnected with high bandwidth, low latency networking. In addition to regions and AZs, AWS also operates a globally distributed point of presence network called POPs. These host Amazon CloudFront, a content delivery network, Amazon Route 53, a public domain name system, and AWS Global Accelerator, an edge networking optimization service. To summarize and visualize it a bit differently, I like to think of it as a pyramid. On top is the AWS Cloud. AWS offers geographic regions across the globe, which in themselves have at least 3 AZs each. Regions and AZs are logical constructs supported by the physical data centers and POPs. As you move from top to bottom, the number of resources increases. Now we have understood what AWS is, why it was invented, and how it's built. Next, let's understand the ownership of different components involved between AWS and the customer. Security and compliance is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer. AWS, at a minimum, operates, manages, and controls the physical infrastructure and its virtualization. The customer is responsible for what he deploys and builds using the provided services. To put it into the most simple words, everything in the cloud is the responsibility of the customer. The security of the cloud is the responsibility of AWS. At the beginning, I said at the minimum this is what AWS takes care of. The reason is the dividing line is actually not static, but can move higher up depending on what service is consumed. So at a high level, we can order the AWS services in different categories. We have infrastructure services like EC2 and VPC. We also have platform services like RDS and EKS. And we have the so-called serverless services like S3 and Lambda. There are even more categories, and some might name the ones I've listed differently, but that is not the point I'm trying to make here. The further you move to the right, the less you control and the less you can customize the underlying layers. But you also have less responsibility and more built-in best practices. So the other way around, the more you move to the left, the more you control and the more you can customize. But you also have more responsibility, for example, the hardening of the operating system, patching virtual machines, and so on. If you were not able to define serverless before and wondering what it means, you should have a good understanding of it now. So there are still servers, of course, but you don't have to manage them. That's why it's called serverless. The key message on this topic is that regardless of what service you choose, there is always a shared responsibility. That is all for now that I wanted to cover on the shared responsibility model. Let's go back to the overview and see where we are standing. We have gone through 4 out of the 7 topics. This is it for the first part. In the next part, we'll continue right here, starting with the AWS well-architected framework. If you enjoyed the video and it was valuable, consider to leave a like for the algorithm. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave a comment. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next part and future videos. See you in the next. Bye.